In the summer of 207 BC, deep in southern Italy, the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca waited in Apulia for news that would decide the fate of the Mediterranean world. Hundreds of miles to the north, along the banks of the Metaurus River, his younger brother Hasdrubal had successfully crossed the Alps with tens of thousands of reinforcements, seeking a strategic junction that would allow both armies to march together and destroy the Roman Republic. Welcome back to World Chronicles. Today, we analyze the Battle of the Metaurus, the intercepted courier that changed ancient history. Consul Nero's high-stakes gamble, the tactical flank that crushed the Carthaginian line, and how a gruesome message delivered to Hannibal's camp saved the Roman Republic. Instead of an official courier arriving with marching orders, the long-awaited dispatch reached Hannibal in the form of a blood-stained cloth bundle. Flung over the Carthaginian camp defenses by Roman horsemen, the package hit the earth with a heavy, wet thud. Unwrapping the cloth, Hannibal found himself staring into the severed head of his younger brother. For 11 agonizing years following the catastrophe at Cannae in 216 BC, Hannibal had remained completely undefeated on Italian soil, defeating every consular army sent to oppose him. Yet, in a single stroke, Rome brought his decade-long invasion to the brink of total failure without ever engaging his veteran corps in pitched battle. This dramatic shift was made possible when the Roman consul Gaius Claudius Nero intercepted a secret Carthaginian dispatch written in Punic. Recognizing a fleeting window of opportunity, Nero executed an unauthorized and highly illegal gamble. Leaving a skeleton crew behind under false campfires to deceive Hannibal, Nero led 7,000 elite legionaries on a rapid 300-mile march north. By combining forces with his co-consul at Sena Gallica, Nero ambushed and annihilated Hasdrubal's northern army before Hannibal even realized the enemy commander facing him had left his southern camp. To understand how the conflict reached this critical juncture, one must examine the aftermath of Cannae in 216 BC. In a single afternoon, Hannibal destroyed a massive Roman army, leaving an estimated 50,000 to 70,000 legionaries dead upon the field. By every convention of ancient warfare, such a catastrophic loss should have compelled Rome to seek terms. Instead, the Roman Senate took an unprecedented stance. It refused to negotiate, banned public weeping, declined to ransom prisoners, and declared a war of total endurance. Realizing that facing Hannibal in open battle meant operational suicide, Rome adopted the strategy proposed by Quintus Fabius Maximus, known as Cunctator, or the Delayer. The Fabian strategy was simple yet brutal. Avoid pitched engagements against Hannibal's tactical superiority while waging an unrelenting war of logistical attrition. Roman legions shadowed Hannibal at a distance, cutting off his foraging parties, burning crops, and preventing his troops from establishing permanent bases. Hannibal's multi-ethnic force, comprising Numidian cavalry, Iberian infantry, and Gallic skirmishers, was forced into constant movement across southern Italy simply to secure daily grain. This stalemate exposed the fundamental flaw in Hannibal's grand strategy. Though a master tactician, he lacked the specialized siege engines required to breach Rome's massive stone Servian walls. More critically, his goal of dismantling the Roman alliance system met only partial success. While major southern cities like Capua and Tarentum defected, the core Latin colonies of central Italy remained loyal. Rome possessed a vast demographic reserve, capable of mobilizing hundreds of thousands of registered citizens and Italian allies to replace lost legions. Hannibal, by contrast, had no such luxury. Every veteran lost in a minor skirmish was irreplaceable. When Hannibal requested reinforcements, he encountered a Carthaginian Senate operating under different strategic priorities. The government in North Africa prioritized the valuable silver mines of Iberia and local defensive needs over committing major reserves to Italy. For nearly a decade, the responsibility of holding Spain fell upon Hasdrubal Barca, who remained locked in a bitter war against Roman forces led by the Scipio family. That Iberian balance finally broke in 208 BC at the Battle of Baecula. Although outmaneuvered on the field by Publius Cornelius Scipio, Hasdrubal preserved the core of his veteran infantry. Abandoning Spain, Hasdrubal gathered recruits and turned toward the formidable barrier of the Alps. Rome was bleeding out from a decade of war, but in the spring of 207 BC, news arrived from the Alps that made the Roman Senate freeze. A second army of Barca was entering Italy. Hasdrubal Barca moved with remarkable speed. Benefiting from the Alpine routes cleared by his elder brother 13 years earlier and winning over local Gallic tribes rather than fighting them, Hasdrubal crossed the high mountain passes in the spring of 207 BC. As he descended into the Po Valley, his force expanded as thousands of Gallic warriors and Ligurian recruits rallied to his banners. Hasdrubal's army, estimated by ancient accounts at roughly 30,000 men, featured a core of Iberian veterans, Ligurian auxiliaries, and war elephants. Yet, despite its numerical size, this northern reinforcement army lacked the uniform training and battle-tested cohesion of the forces Hannibal had led into Italy over a decade prior. In the far south, Hannibal Barca remained isolated in the rugged territory of Bruttium and Apulia. His force, reduced by 11 years of continuous campaigning following his victory at Cannae, was anchored by his remaining African and Iberian veterans. Facing him was a network of Roman garrisons, tasked not with defeating him in open battle, but with entangling him in endless evasive maneuvers. Hannibal needed Hasdrubal's northern army to break this geopolitical deadlock. If the two Barcid brothers could achieve a planned junction in central Italy, their combined strength would give them the operational mass required to march directly on Rome or compel remaining Italian allies into a general revolt. To prevent this fatal convergence, the Roman Republic relied on its dual consulship system, dividing executive and military command between two elected leaders. The elections for 207 BC had elevated two bitter personal rivals. Consul Gaius Claudius Nero, an aggressive patrician commander, was assigned to the south to monitor and contain Hannibal. To the north, the Senate posted Consul Marcus Livius Salinator at Sena Gallica to bar Hasdrubal's path along the Adriatic coast. Livius, a cautious veteran who held a lingering grudge against Nero, was forced by the Senate to put aside personal animosity to coordinate a unified defense for the Republic's survival. The Roman defensive setup allocated multiple legions and allied cohorts to each consul, giving the Republic over 40,000 legionaries and auxiliaries split between the northern and southern theaters. While the Roman forces possessed superior organizational discipline and standardized supply lines, they were severely constrained by geography. If Hasdrubal managed to slip past Consul Livius in the north before Consul Nero could pin down Hannibal in the south, the divided Roman field armies could be defeated in detail. Strategic initiative thus hinged entirely on intelligence and timing. Hasdrubal had successfully reached central Italy, but he possessed no direct line of communication with his brother's southern camp. To coordinate their junction, Hasdrubal was forced to send dispatch riders across enemy-controlled territory. The two Carthaginian armies were separated by nearly 300 miles of rugged Italian terrain. All Hasdrubal needed to do was tell his brother where to meet him. In the early summer of 27 BC, Hasdrubal dispatched 6 horsemen from his northern camp to carry a critical operational message across central Italy. Written in Punic, the dispatch outlined Hasdrubal's planned march south through Umbria and proposed a direct junction with his brother. However, navigating enemy territory proved fatal. Seeking Hannibal's mobile force as it maneuvered through Apulia, the riders lost their way near Tarentum. Instead of finding the Carthaginian camp, they were intercepted by a Roman cavalry patrol. Captured without a fight, the couriers and their unread letters were immediately delivered to the southern Roman headquarters at Canusium. Consul Gaius Claudius Nero immediately summoned Punic interpreters to translate the captured document. As the contents were read aloud, Nero realized he possessed an extraordinary, fleeting intelligence advantage. Hasdrubal had explicitly laid out his entire campaign route, timing, and strategic objective. More importantly, because the messengers had failed to reach their target, Hannibal remained entirely ignorant of his brother's position. Nero understood the operational reality in an instant. If he remained passive in Apulia, the two Barcid armies would eventually link up. But if he acted before Hannibal discovered the breach, he could exploit his internal lines of communication to strike a decisive blow. Taking advantage of this information required an act of unprecedented constitutional defiance. Under Roman law, a consul was legally bound to his assigned theater of war. Abandoning a province or marching to assist another commander without express permission from the Senate constituted high treason. Nero chose to risk his political career and life on a single military gamble, dispatching a quick messenger to inform the Senate of his actions, demanding they shift reserves to secure Rome rather than waiting for their permission. Nero pre-selected 6,000 elite legionaries and 1,000 cavalry from his ranks. To conceal his departure from Hannibal's scouts, Nero left his main army behind, under strict instructions. Maintain the usual perimeter guards, sound the standard watch trumpets, and keep the campfires burning brightly every night. Under the cover of darkness, Nero's strike force slipped out of the camp and turned north along the Italian roads. Nero had sent riders ahead along the line of march, instructing local magistrates and allied towns to prepare provisions directly alongside the route. Italian civilians lined the roadsides with carts of grain, wine, meat, and fresh remount horses, allowing the column to resupply without breaking stride. The physical toll on the men was immense. The relentless, rhythmic strike of iron-shod caligae echoed against stone paving day and night as the legionaries marched at an unheard-of speed, sleeping in brief shifts on the bare ground without ever pitching a formal camp. In roughly 6 days, Nero's detachment covered nearly 300 miles, an extraordinary feat of endurance for ancient heavy infantry. By the time they neared the northern theater near Sena Gallica, Hasdrubal's army was camped just a short distance from the legions of Consul Marcus Livius Salinator. Nero had achieved the impossible by reaching the northern front undetected by either Hannibal or Hasdrubal. However, entering the northern headquarters presented a final tactical challenge. To preserve complete operational secrecy, Consul Livius instructed Nero's arriving column to enter the Roman camp only under the cover of dense night. Rather than expanding the outer palisade or erecting new tents, which would have immediately alerted Carthaginian scouts to the arrival of major reinforcements, Livius ordered his legionaries to share their quarters. Nero's 7,000 men slipped quietly into the existing tents 2 by 2, concealing the sudden arrival of thousands of heavy infantry and horsemen within the established footprint of the camp. By daybreak, the combined Roman force stood at an estimated 40,000 to 45,000 troops, effectively doubling the military strength facing Hasdrubal while preserving the visual illusion of a single consular army. Despite these elaborate measures, Hannibal Barca was an experienced field commander, trained in the Barcid school of strategic vigilance, and he quickly sensed a shift across the plain of Sina Gallica. Riding out on a forward reconnaissance mission, Hasdrubal's veteran eyes picked out subtle irregularities inside the Roman perimeter. He noted legionaries carrying sun-bleached, weathered shields that bore the unmistakable marks of long, rapid travel, alongside cavalry horses that appeared gaunt and visibly lathered with dried sweat. More alarming still was the ritual sound of the Roman military signals. The morning trumpet blast, or tessera, rang out once in the camp of the local praetor, but sounded twice in the camp of Consul Livius, signaling the presence of 2 full consuls in the field. Recognizing that his campaign had been critically compromised and that he was now facing 2 combined consular armies, Hasdrubal knew he could not risk an open field battle. With an estimated force of roughly 30,000 Iberian veterans, Ligurians, and untested Gauls, he was heavily outnumbered by the Roman concentration. Hasdrubal ordered an immediate night retreat to disengage from the enemy. Under the shroud of darkness, the Carthaginian army extinguished its campfires and fell back toward the north, seeking to place the Metaurus River between his army and the Roman legions. Hasdrubal's objective was to find a suitable ford, cross to the northern bank, and establish a fortified position where he could reorganize his forces. However, the night maneuver quickly turned into an operational disaster. In the deep darkness, Hasdrubal's native Italian guides betrayed him, deserting the column and leaving the Carthaginian army blind in unfamiliar, hostile terrain. Left without local pathfinders, the 30,000 troops stumbled through the winding, muddy lowlands of the river valley. The Metaurus River, swollen by recent rains, ran deep and treacherous, preventing any safe passage for his heavy baggage train and 10 war elephants. As the first light of dawn revealed the coastal plain, Hasdrubal found his exhausted, sleep-deprived army trapped on the southern bank, forced into an environment that neutralized his ability to retreat further. With Roman cavalry already harassing his rear guard and the main consular legions marching up in full battle formation, Hasdrubal realized that a confrontation was unavoidable. According to historical reconstructions drawn from Polybius and Livy, Hasdrubal displayed remarkable composure in arranging his deployment along the steep, uneven river terrain, placing his weakest troops behind an unassailable cliff to compensate for his numerical inferiority. On his far left flank, Hasdrubal posted his least reliable troops, untested Gallic recruits, atop a steep, rocky ridge intersected by deep ravines. Because the terrain was virtually impassable, Consul Nero, commanding the Roman right wing, could not assault the Gallic positions without catastrophic losses. In the center and on the Carthaginian right, Hasdrubal massed his finest forces, Iberian veterans and Ligurian infantry. Facing them across the narrow lowlands was Consul Livius. In front of his center, Hasdrubal posted his 10 remaining war elephants, intending to use their kinetic weight to disrupt the Roman ranks before the infantry made contact. As the battle opened, the conflict immediately split into 2 distinct sectors. On the Roman right, Nero's legionaries stood neutralized, blocked by the cliff faces shielding the Gauls, who remained stationary on the height. Meanwhile, on the low ground bordering the river, combat erupted with brutal intensity. Hasdrubal's war elephants charged the advancing Roman center, while several beasts succeeded in trampling the initial maniples. The dense volley of Roman javelins and the opening of tactical lanes within the ranks threw the animals into wild panic. The maddened pachyderms turned back into their own formation, trampling through Carthaginian and Roman lines alike before being slain or driven off. With the elephants cleared, the heavy infantry locked together in a furious, grinding war of attrition. Hasdrubal's Iberian veterans, thoroughly familiar with legionary tactics from Spain, held their ground with immovable discipline. For hours, Livius's legionaries pushed against the Iberian shield wall, but neither side could break the opposing tactical structure. The engagement devolved into a static battle of endurance, where fresh Roman cohorts rotated into the front line only to be met by equal firmness from the Carthaginian center. Hasdrubal personally rode along the fighting line, directing reserves to threatened sectors and holding his formation intact against superior numbers. Observing the battlefield from his elevated position on the far right, Consul Nero recognized a critical operational reality. The impassable terrain that prevented him from attacking the Gauls also ensured those same Gauls could not assist Hasdrubal's center. Realizing his 6,000 legionaries were completely wasted standing idle before an empty cliff, Nero executed a stroke of brilliant tactical improvisation. He detached his cohorts from the right wing, wheeled them to the rear, and marched them at a run directly behind Livius's engaged lines. The heavy, rhythmic thud of thousands of armored boots and the rising dust cloud behind the Roman center signaled a radical shift in the geometry of the battle, completely hidden from Carthaginian sight. Marching past the rear of the Roman army, Nero brought his fresh cohorts around the extreme left wing of the Carthaginian formation. Swinging his line inward, Nero delivered a crushing flank and rear assault against Hasdrubal's Iberian veterans, who were still fully engaged against Livius's front. Ancient heavy infantry formations, engineered primarily to absorb forward shock, possessed virtually no flexibility to defend against a heavy assault from behind. Trapped in an escalating vice between Livius's relentless forward pressure and Nero's cohorts striking from the rear, the Iberian center began to disintegrate under the sudden weight of the double engagement. The structural collapse of the Carthaginian army was swift and total. The Iberian veterans, squeezed into a constricted pocket where individuals could barely wield their weapons, were systematically cut down in formation or driven back toward the unfordable waters of the Metaurus River. Sensing decisive victory, Livius's legions pressed forward, shattering the remaining Ligurian lines. On the heights, the unengaged Gauls, witnessing the total destruction below, broke ranks and fled, only to be hunted down by Roman cavalry. What had begun as a balanced battle of position transformed within minutes into total annihilation. As the Carthaginian lines dissolved into chaos along the Metaurus River, Hannibal Barca recognized that his strategic mission had collapsed. Refusing to flee the slaughter or endure the humiliation of Roman captivity, the Carthaginian general made a final, deliberate choice. Setting spurs to his horse, Hasdrubal rode directly into the densest mass of the Roman cohorts, fighting until he was cut down. His final moments earned admiration even from his mortal enemies. Both Polybius and Titus Livy recorded that Hasdrubal died in a manner worthy of his father Hamilcar and his brother Hannibal, meeting his end sword in hand on the field of battle. The defeat of the northern army was absolute. Thousands of Carthaginian, Iberian, and Ligurian soldiers lay dead along the riverbanks, while thousands more were taken prisoner or dispersed into the hills, and the surviving war elephants were neutralized. In the aftermath of the rout, Consul Gaius Claudius Nero ordered his men to locate the body of the fallen Carthaginian commander. Once identified, Hasdrubal's head was severed from his corpse to serve as proof of the victory. Without pausing to celebrate or allow his troops prolonged rest, Nero immediately ordered his 7,000 legionaries to assemble for the long return journey. Turning back toward the south, Nero's column retraced their route with the same astonishing velocity that had brought them to the Metaurus. Driven by the urgent necessity of reaching Apulia before Hannibal discovered the gap in the Roman line, the legionaries covered nearly 300 miles in just over 5 days. The secret march succeeded entirely. When Nero's force slipped back into their southern camp at Canusium, Hannibal remained completely unaware that the consul facing him had ever departed, believing the Roman lines before him were intact. Rather than opening formal diplomatic communications or sending heralds under a flag of truce, Nero chose to deliver the news of Hasdrubal's defeat through a chilling act of psychological warfare. Under Nero's orders, a Roman cavalry detachment rode toward the forward outposts of the Carthaginian camp in Apulia. From their saddles, the riders flung the blood-stained cloth bundle containing Hasdrubal's severed head over the perimeter fence, where it landed among the Carthaginian sentries. The bundle was brought directly to Hannibal's tent. Unwrapping the cloth, Hannibal found himself looking down at the pale, bloodless face of his younger brother. According to the historian Livy, Hannibal gazed at the features of Hasdrubal and quietly declared, "I see there the fate of Carthage." The delivery of Hasdrubal's head was not merely a personal tragedy for the Barcid family. It was the final, devastating blow to Hannibal's 11-year campaign in Italy. The hope of combining forces with a second Carthaginian field army to besiege or intimidate Rome was shattered forever. Realizing that no further reinforcements would arrive from Spain or North Africa, Hannibal understood that his strategic position in central Italy was untenable. Recognizing that his forces lacked the numerical strength to challenge the combined Roman field armies without Hasdrubal's northern army, Hannibal ordered an immediate and comprehensive strategic retreat. He abandoned his outlying garrisons across Apulia and Lucania, drawing all remaining Carthaginian forces back into the rugged, mountainous territory of Bruttium, the southwestern toe of Italy. For the remaining 6 years of the war, Hannibal remained confined to this narrow coastal enclave, incapable of launching another major offensive action on Italian soil. The central paradox of the Second Punic War had reached its absolute climax. The Carthaginian commander remained personally undefeated in every pitched battle he fought in Italy. Yet, he was structurally imprisoned by a strategic geography he could no longer alter. In the city of Rome, the announcement of Hasdrubal's defeat triggered a profound psychological transformation. For 11 agonizing years, the Roman Republic had existed under the constant threat of total destruction, living in perpetual dread of a second Cannae. When the messengers sent by consuls Nero and Livius officially confirmed the news before the Senate, the lingering atmosphere of crisis dissolved into immense relief. Magistrates reopened the public courts, merchants unbolted their shops, and the Senate decreed a 3-day religious festival of Thanksgiving. The long-standing myth of Carthaginian invincibility was permanently broken, restoring economic and political stability across the Italian peninsula. Beyond its domestic impact, the Battle of the Metaurus fundamentally altered the global Mediterranean balance of power. By eliminating the northern front and trapping Hannibal within Bruttium, the victory freed massive strategic reserves that Rome had previously been forced to hold in defensive deployment. This operational flexibility empowered the rising political faction led by Publius Cornelius Scipio. Having completed the conquest of Carthaginian Spain, Scipio returned to Rome and advocated for a bold change in grand strategy. He argued before the Senate that the most effective method to force Hannibal out of Italy was not to engage him in a war of attrition in Bruttium, but to launch a direct amphibious invasion of the Carthaginian homeland in North Africa. Secured by the decisive outcome at the Metaurus, the Roman Senate granted Scipio command of the African expedition, paving the way for his crossing to North Africa in 204 BC. The existential threat to the Italian mainland had effectively vanished. Carthage was now forced onto the defensive on its own soil, culminating in Hannibal's eventual recall to defend his native city. Nero's illicit night march and tactical brilliance on the banks of the Metaurus had unlocked the strategic deadlock of a decade-long war. Had Hasdrubal Barca successfully linked forces with his brother in central Italy, their combined army of over 60,000 troops would have posed an insurmountable threat to the Roman Republic. Though Rome possessed vast reserves, 11 years of conflict had brought its economy and alliance system near total exhaustion. A unified Barcid force could have severed vital agricultural supply lines, isolated the Latin colonies, and forced the Roman Senate to accept Carthaginian terms. The Battle of the Metaurus was therefore the true strategic tipping point of the Second Punic War. It was the moment when initiative passed irrevocably from Carthage to Rome, ensuring that Mediterranean hegemony would be forged by Roman legions. Military theorists, including modern strategic analyst B.H. Liddell Hart, have long cited Consul Claudius Nero's maneuver as a masterpiece of operational indirect approach. By exploiting captured intelligence, enforcing absolute secrecy, and utilizing internal lines of communication, Nero achieved a sudden, decisive concentration of force. Rather than remaining passively within his assigned theater, Nero recognized that operational survival required destroying Hasdrubal in isolation. On the battlefield itself, his decision to abandon an unassailable sector and march behind friendly lines to strike the Carthaginian rear demonstrated a tactical flexibility that became a hallmark of Roman legionary doctrine. The disaster at the Metaurus set in motion an unbroken chain of events that led to the collapse of Carthaginian power. Deprived of northern reinforcements, Hannibal could only watch as Rome shifted from existential defense to strategic projection. In 202 BC, at the Battle of Zama, Scipio Africanus employed operational mobility to defeat Hannibal on African soil and end the war. In 146 BC, the Third Punic War concluded with the total destruction of Carthage. That imperial trajectory was decided not in Africa, but along the muddy banks of the Metaurus River in 207 BC. Ultimately, the campaign demonstrated that war is decided as much by logistics, intelligence, and command decisions as by battlefield genius. Hannibal Barca remains one of history's greatest field commanders, yet his strategic dream was shattered not by his own tactical error, but by an intercepted courier and a 300-mile night march. Share your perspective in the comments below, like this video, and subscribe to World Chronicles to explore the defining conflicts that shaped our world.